Welcome to our YouTube channel, Moneyline with Nancy TV. This is where you get the latest updates on business, finance, economy, market, as well as investment information. If you couldn't follow us live on television, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, press the notification bell so that you can get notifications. Thank you. Enjoy this video. All right, welcome back to the program. My guest is joining me now. He's Professor Ebenezer Obadare. He's a Dillon Senior Fellow for Africa Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations. Prof, good morning and welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Prof, can you unmute your audio? I can hear you. Hello, Prof, can you hear me? Prof, can you unmute your audio issue? I hope, Prof, you can hear me now.
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear too. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Can I see Prof, please? Yes, thank you for joining us. I know it's very early there. I appreciate this.
It is.
Yes,
yeah, thank you for having me. No, it's okay.
You should be sleeping by now.
All
right, let's get started, Prof, because we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's a wild, wild week for President Trump, his second presidency. Like I mentioned also earlier, we're seemingly seeing like an organized Trump, as it were. In fact, when he was signing one of the executive orders, he mentioned that he wants to get out what he calls the cancer of President Biden's administration out. What's your own analysis of President Trump's first week in office?
Thank you for having me. I think the least you can say is that it was not boring. If President Trump, the 45th president, was a surprise for everyone, I don't think anybody can claim that the President Trump 2.0, the 47th president of the United States, is a surprise. As a matter of fact, most of the things is done in the very first week since he took the oath of presidency. None of them, if one is being honest, has come as a surprise. The only surprise is that he's doing exactly those things that he said, he was going to do. So he's done a lot over the last 1 week. Some of those things are going to stand. Some of them would probably not withstand a legal challenge, but it's been very, very interesting, but at the same time, very predictable.
He's emboldened this second presidency. He's organized, but he's still Trump. So for us, we're not entirely surprised. Do you think that perhaps what is surprising is the raft of executive orders that he signed on birthright citizenship, on immigration? We're seeing that planes are carrying illegal immigrants going back to their countries. We're seeing issues with Colombia, for example, trade wars brewing and all of that.
I think here's the interesting thing. Again, you can't say that you are surprised because he did mention it.
Yeah.
Now, especially the executive order regarding birthright citizenship. So to put this in context, perhaps a couple of things will help people to understand where President Trump is coming from in this regard. One is the frustration that many Americans have experienced over the previous administration's apparent decision to let in millions of people illegally into the country through the border with Mexico. So that's number one. And we can sort of dive into that later on if you want to. The second context that I think is important here is that the idea that the United States is one of the only few of the advanced countries that allows birthright citizenship, and the fact that that should no longer be the case, that has been on the table for with regard to the conversation about immigration for some time. Now, remember when President Trump was signing the Executive Council, he said something. It was like a throwaway remark, but many people missed it. He said, "Let's see if this one stands. Who knows if this one is going to stand?" Basically, President Trump himself, even though he was signing that executive order regarding birthright citizenship, sort of sense that it might not withstand legal challenge. And as he suspected, and as every analyst has expected, is been taken to court. The executive order, has been challenged in
Challenge.
court. My sense is that it's unlikely to stand, but the fact that President Trump is willing to go ahead with it and to test the waters is itself a sense of the way in which the debate around immigration has changed in the United States over the last 5 years.
So, does President Trump actually even did think that he can change birthright citizenship with a stroke of a pen when something is in the Constitution, 14th Amendment? I was listening to J.D. Vance, the Vice President, some months ago when he granted an interview to PBS, and he said, you will just have a tourist come to the country and give birth and expect that the child will be a U.S. citizen, and the child becomes a U.S. citizen. You know, that there's nowhere else in the world that that happens.
So again, if you go further back in history, and I'll come back to the second part of your question. If you go further back, I think it's important to understand where the idea of birthright citizenship itself is coming from. It's coming from the fact that, remember, millions of people were brought from Africa as slaves, across part of the Atlantic slave trade to the United States. And the question arose at a point in Africa and in American history, pardon me, about the citizenship. Remember, the fundamental question used to be about the humanity of those people that the black people brought from Africa via the transatlantic slave trade were not regarded as human. So having fought that battle and won it for the humanity of black people, a second question arose as to, hold on, these people came from elsewhere. They don't even look like us. What are they? Are they Americans or not? And the whole idea of birthright citizenship was to extend that privilege of American citizenship to Africans who had not been born in America. And that was the origin of birthright citizenship. And it's been a cornerstone of American political culture since then. The idea that that should no longer be the case has nothing to do with black people. It's got to do with the idea, with the reality that over the last decade or so, and doubling down over the course of the Biden presidency, a lot of people have come into the country without proper documentation. And there is serious debate going on in policy circles, not only within the American presidency, about what to do. What I think President Trump is trying to do is to set the tone here. I don't think he thinks he can get away with it, but he's trying to change the terms of the debate when it comes to immigration. But remember, one of the things he has also done as part of the raft of executive orders that he signed is to also send American troops to the border and to declare emergency in the border, basically signaling that when it comes to immigration, it's no longer business as usual.
So what will happen now? Of course, it's been challenging court, especially for that birthright citizenship. Will there be a stay? Because, for example, now I know that many women, many families will be in the United States as we're speaking now. Many people will even be giving birth as we're speaking now. You're in the United States as we speak. What do you think will be happening now? Will they be granting citizenship? You know, like a stay, freeze on it while President Trump has signed an executive order challenging that?
So because there's now a legal challenge to the executive order, I think it probably means that the status quo ante will prevail, meaning that birthright citizenship continues to be the law in the United States until it is overturned by a proper court
Court
of
of
law.
law, yeah.
My sense is that this is going to go on and on. I won't be surprised if this goes all the way up all the way to the Supreme Court. It might take a year, it might take 2 years. There are all sorts of legal hoops to jump through here. If you ask me where I'm putting my money, is President Trump going to succeed in trying to eliminate birthright citizenship in the United States? My money is on him not getting what he wants
Not
in this particular
succeeding.
matter.
So you're thinking this would not sail through?
I don't think it will sail through. I don't
Okay,
think it will withstand the legal challenge. And as I
okay.
said earlier, I suspect that President Trump himself knows that he's on shaky legal ground in this matter.
Now let's take a look at global balance of power. How do you think it will shift under President Trump's leadership now? Because he's seemingly quarreling with everyone. You know, his characteristic of him, Donald Trump, no, the Canadian Prime Minister quarreling. Colombia, they had a spat over the weekend, came back. In fact, there was a man at the European Commission or so actually used the F word to Donald Trump just a few days ago boldly and told him to F word away. You know, so he's quarreling with the rest of the world, but Africa is not yet in the mix, though I will come back to Africa in a bit. So how do you, what do you think will happen to the balance of power under his leadership, particularly relating to geopolitical, geopolitical tensions that we're seeing?
I think that it's a great question. I think the way to answer it is to see it this way, that already there is a global struggle for supremacy among at least three countries. That's the United States, China, and Russia, right? And that there's a struggle going on for these countries to broaden their footprint and to extend their influence in different parts of the world. Since the end of the World War in 1945, the United States has been the undoubted political superpower in the it has been one of the major superpowers in the United States. Following the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the United States emerged as the sole superpower in the United States. What we've seen over the last decade and more, maybe over the last 2 decades, is that China has emerged, has become a major economic power, and is trying to challenge the supremacy of the United States. And if anybody did not know that that was going on, that emerged more fully after Russia invaded Ukraine in early in 2022. So that is already going on. But the interesting thing is that President Trump, and this is one way to understand everything that he does and probably will do, he perceives that the United States is being given the short end of the stick across several multilateral institutions, and that the country does not get enough recognition for what it does. So, hence the Make America Great Again, yeah, which is the cornerstone of his not just domestic policy but foreign policy. What this means is that President Trump thinks that, and this is not just President Trump, it's people of a similar ideological and political persuasion who think that the United States it does no longer get the respect that it used to get, and that the United States should now begin to get respect, whereas it used to be disrespected. That's the that's the that's the center that's the center point of President Trump's domestic and foreign policy. Now, there's also the personal element to that, his own brashness, the way it comes across, and the fact that it does not conform to the normal diplomatic standards. That's the personal element he brings into this. Now, will it bring him, or will it continue to bring him success, as it apparently did in the recent spat with Colombia, where he imposed, a raft of tariffs, and then the president of Colombia walked back, and then President Trump apparently won. It's unclear, but it's important to keep in mind that the main reason why President Trump is acting the way he's acting, and the reason he's doing what he's doing, is because he senses that the United States is being challenged, that the rest of the world has not been fair to the United States, and that it's time to begin to turn things around.
If President Trump redefines UN participation, especially in global institutions such as the United Nations, WHO, and even its own contribution to NATO, uh, how would this create a leadership vacuum? Because somebody must fill it, as it were, and what other nations might fill it, and who stands to benefit in all of this?
So again, that's a great question. It doesn't seem as if President Trump minds. And if you're coming from where he's coming from, that it is that vacuum exactly that you want to precipitate. You want to show the world that, look, without American power or without American money, there are certain things in the international system will not happen. So let me give you an example. One of the things he did in that first week was to withdraw the United States from the World Health Organization. The United States is the largest donor to that very important international organization. But President Trump is saying, look, I don't like the way things went on during COVID. I don't like the fact that, for the most part, the United States is the one that pays the most money in these institutions. I want a situation where the terms of engagement are redrawn so that even if the United States were to come back, it will come back under a new political regime, so to say. So in a sense, you can also say that some of the things that he's doing is only trying to strengthen the hand of the United States. It's only, negotiating. These are opening gambits. And this is exactly what I was saying about the birthright citizenship thing. There's a sense in which I think it goes to the extreme in order to get back to somewhere in the middle after negotiations. Does it think that birthright citizenship is going to go away? I don't think so. But it's trying to change the terms of the debate with respect to immigration in the United States. Is the United States going to be out of, for example, the World Health Organization permanently? Again, I doubt it. But what President Trump appears to be doing is to at least try to have a different conversation about the role of the United States in the international system and in the current world order.
So with all of this, and with the history of President Trump as it is, withdrawing from international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, like we saw when he became president the first time, this is return to power. What do you think will happen to global cooperation around climate issues? And what does that actually mean for Africa? And I chose my words, which is really highly vulnerable to climate change.
I think this is one of those areas where people are genuinely and legitimately worried about what President Trump is doing. Um, Now, there's a conversation to be had about climate change and about its impact on all of us. But I think most people agree that we're going through a very interesting time in terms of the climate, and that human impact on the environment is becoming increasingly deleterious. Now, what do we do about that? How do we get in the direction of what is called the green revolution? What role is the state going to play? What role will international organizations play? How do we begin to get a grip so that the worst effects of climate change are averted and human flourishing is enabled? How do we do that? There's a legitimate conversation to be had there. The worry is that if the United States, as President Trump has now done, pulls out of the Paris climate deal, the worry is that this will send a signal to everybody that not only is the United States not interested in joining the rest of the world in pursuing policies that will make sure that we treat the environment better, it will also encourage other people who might be sitting on the fence and who think that the right thing to do is to not be part of this deal. So the larger point here, I think, is about just the symbolism of American power. It's interesting that you and I are having this conversation. We're having this conversation because we are worried about what the United States might do. And I think this is where President Trump too is coming from. He realizes that American power is tremendous and that people outside the United States realize that. He wants that to tell. And the way he's going about that is through this raft of executive orders concerning immigration, concerning tariffs in the case of Colombia. Some might be coming with Canada and China, we don't know. The withdrawal from the World Health Organization. It's been a very interesting, it's been a whirlwind of a week, and it's not exactly clear where we go next.
Exactly. Very well. It's a wild, wild wind week, as it were. What role do you think that Africa can now play in a Trump-led global order that prioritizes bilateral agreements over multilateral agreements? That's one part of my question.
Okay.
Which do you think would open new opportunities for Africa? We saw it in his last presidency, 2017 to 2021, if I'm not mistaken. The other part of my question is Trump's approach to foreign aid. And we know that a lot of African countries are dependent on that for development. So how do you think that those cuts can particularly influence Africa's economic progress? And could this push African countries to seek alternatives elsewhere? China is, of course, always willing to lend a hand.
I know that. So this is a very interesting and very complicated issue. So there are two parts to this. The first part is President Trump appears not to be very interested in things beyond the United States. Remember, he says, make America great again. He puts America first. Now, when you think about it that way, you don't expect him to pay significant attention to Africa. And maybe that's okay, maybe that's not okay. We can jump into that. But the way to analyze President Trump with respect to Africa is to go back to his first coming, as president. And he had this signal policy. Every president of the United States has a signal policy toward Africa. So his own was, I think it was called Prosper Africa. And the centerpiece of it was the idea that the United States would no longer just hand out money to African countries, but that the United States will emphasize trade and mutually beneficial commercial relationship with African countries. And I think if you look at it very carefully, that seems to also be what African countries themselves want. So if you look at the rhetoric coming out of African policy circles over the last 2 decades, at the very least, there's been this insistence that the rest of the world should stop giving Africa aid and that the rest of the world should start trading with African countries. As a matter of fact, it was in recognition of this that we had the African Growth and Opportunity Act. I think this was back in 2000.
Yes, AGOA.
And I think it's still the AGOA. And what AGOA basically does is to say, the United States is not going to impose duty on a range of goods and products coming out of Africa into the United States. So it's a very trade-friendly piece of legislation. And African countries have benefited tremendously from it. So it's important to track that and to monitor it and to see if coming in September 2025, I think, when the legislation is due for renewal, whether President Trump is going to renew it. So I guess what I'm saying is this. There are grounds for anxiety because we are talking about a president who is utterly unpredictable, who can say one thing today and do another thing tomorrow. But where I think we can be positive about this is that if truly President Trump is saying, the only thing I'm going to do is to transact business with you, and that I'm going to watch out for American interest, I think what we need to realize is that the fact that a president of the United States is watching out for American interest does not mean that African interest is left out at the same time. Meaning, America first should not have to mean Africa last. From the American side, business, diplomatic relations can be conducted in such a way that both the United States and African countries benefit. The thing to then think about then is, how do African countries benefit? How do we make sure that they use depending on the countries concerned, their strategic location, how do they make sure that, in terms of their trade, their security needs, that they also try to develop relations, mutually beneficial relations with the United States.
Now,
I
Prof,
think
let me,
that
yes, Prof, let me just hold you a bit there and come in here perhaps with another line to what you're saying. Do you think that African nations should come up collectively now to have one voice on a global stage? Because, yeah, perhaps not really against America first, because America will figure themselves like I always say, and they will do things that, especially with the President Trump now. Do you think that African countries should collectively protect their interests on the global stage? I know we have African Union, but there's also debate. African Union has lost its mojo.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is both yes and no.
Okay.
Insofar as there are affairs of mutual interest and potentially of mutual benefit to African countries, for example, we were talking about the environment, moments ago. I think it's important in that particular regard, or in those particular regards, that African countries speak with one voice. But here's the thing, I think we shouldn't get carried away with this idea that African countries have to speak with one voice. I know politically it just sounds good, and everybody tries to line up behind it. But the truth of the matter is this: various regions of Africa, different regions of Africa, have specific problems. The Sahel has its own climate change challenges. It has a problem with a decades-long Islamist insurgency. The war in the Sudan, is there. For Nigeria, is the problem with Boko Haram and in the northern part of the country. And if you go outside West Africa, if you go to Southern Africa, for instance, South Africa has its own beef, with the United States. Angola is trying to cut a deal with the United States. All I'm saying is there will be enough chances and possibilities for African countries to speak with one voice with respect to certain things. However, it's also important that individual countries, taking cognizance of their specific realities and problems, respond accordingly.
Let's take a look at, of course, Trump's character is that of transactional diplomacy, as it were. Trump doesn't really care. Moreover, he's a businessman, and his own kind of businessman is even different. I was watching him at the World Economic Forum last week, the way he was speaking, as like he was commanding the rest of the world to do his bidding. So it's that of transactional diplomacy. How do you think that African economies, that even African leaders should prepare to withstand the ripple effects of decisions that will be coming from the United States, especially around trade, especially around, for example, interest rate hikes? He signaled that he would tell Jerome Powell to reduce interest rates. So we are waiting for the next meeting from the US Fed. How do you think that would happen? How do you think that would impact African economies?
So let me start with it. It's interesting that you mentioned transactional diplomacy. When I think about my own knowledge of diplomacy and how diplomacy has always been conducted between countries, I would say to say transactional diplomacy is actually tautological. Diplomacy is always
transactional. But
meaning
Trump is
that,
putting it in our face.
which I think is good for us. I think one thing at least you have to say about President Trump is this: you know where you stand. Remember, in the past, he's made a lot of unflattering remarks about African countries. I don't think we should allow that we shouldn't get angry. On the contrary, we should repay transactionalism with transactionalism. The way I see it is this: President Trump's coming, insofar as he emphasizes transactionalism, is actually an opportunity, because it means that at least it's not hiding anything. It's telling you, I'm only going to get into this for the good of the United States, and insofar as I think this benefits the United States. What individual African countries also ought to think about is this: what do I stand to benefit from this? If you have security challenges, for instance, and you think that you can get military assistance, financial assistance from the United States, I think you should approach the United States. If you think the United States is not working for you and your security problems are unlikely to be solved through your alliance with the United States, it's totally up to you as a sovereign country that wishes to enhance its own interests to approach other actors in the international system. The United States is the most important power in the United States, but it's not the only one. And one of the things we've discovered over the last 5 years at least is that many African countries are willing to turn their back on the United States and to head in a different direction.
Direction.
It's one of the reasons why we're where we are in the international system today.
Prof, let me see if I can bring in 3 questions in, and perhaps you have 2 minutes to answer.
Let's do it.
Yes. Do you think he will visit Africa in this second missionary journey? That's one question. Number 2 is, what are the leadership lessons from Trump for African leaders? Should we throw away the baby with the bathwater? In fact, when this question was coming to my mind, I remembered the late Muammar Gaddafi, having this kind of, he would say it as it is, even though he was a dictator, you know. But what are the leadership lessons that we can learn from Trump as Africans? Then I would like to also bring this in terms of fossil fuels. He did talk about making the United States have the lowest price for energy for his citizens. How do you think that will impact nations like Nigeria, for example, Angola? In our budget, we have a target of 2.06 million for this year. Don't also forget that United States is the largest producer of crude oil, even though they also import. I think they are the second largest importer after China, but they produce. So in all of this, where do you see Africa? If you will visit us, or do we even need this visit? Because even some people are saying Barack Obama visited. What did we gain?
Yeah.
So
if I were a betting man, I was putting money on President Trump visiting Africa.
oh,
I would,
okay.
I would,
So
I
let's
would
bet
not.
it then.
No, I will not put my money on the line. I doubt it. And look, President Biden apparently loved Africa, right? But he visited, I think, at the tail end of his presidency,
Yes.
and he went to only one African country. So I don't think he really says anything about a particular leader. And I think the other thing about the question you ask, and I think it's an important question, is this. The fact that a president of the United States does not visit an African country or visit or conduct an African tour, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And in the case of President Trump, I imagine that because he wants to demonstrate, he wants to send out a message to his political base that is America first. I don't think he's going to think about coming to Africa. However, that does not mean that Africa has nothing to gain. The fact that a president does not visit your country does not mean that diplomatic relations or economic relations or trade relations with that country, that those relations do not continue. And what I think African countries need to do is, one, to understand the specific imperatives of this unique geopolitical moment, and to ask themselves the following question: how can we leverage the imperatives of this moment to benefit and advance the interests of African countries? Whether President Trump visits Africa or not, how do we ensure that the interests of African countries, again, it will be collective interests, as I said earlier, but I also imagine that in the cases of many African countries, it will be their specific, unique national interests. How do we ensure that those national interests, in terms of security, in terms of the economy, in terms of the larger population, how do you make sure that those interests continue to be protected, no matter who is in the White House? Remember, President Trump is only going to be there for the next 4 years. He can't run for a third term. So whatever happens, I think the important thing is for African countries to think about their long-term interests, to think about how those interests can be realized under this particular presidency, but much more important, to think about how those interests can be realized long-term. The second part of your question is about
Fossil
leadership.
fuels. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you also
Yeah.
asked about
No.
leadership.
Yes. Yes. Leadership. Go ahead.
Yeah. I in terms of leadership, I don't think President Trump will be my model as an African. I think there's a sense in which, so it's important to keep in mind that the President of the United States, always exercises symbolic power. When you're the President of the United States, everybody is looking at you and taking a cue and trying to see what you do and act accordingly. But I think there is a unique political challenge that many African countries face, and it's about instituting democratic ethos, making sure that their countries are not are transparently governed. Insofar as President Trump leans in the direction of strongman politics and rule outside the rule of law, I would say that that is not a model for African
Model
countries
to
to
take.
follow.
Okay. Just in
Yeah.
30 seconds. Fossil fuels issue.
Um, I think I can, speaking as a Nigerian, I think the rest of the world over the last 10 years and heading for has been sending us a signal that maybe the era of fossil fuel is over. The green economy is upon us. People are finding alternatives, countries are finding alternatives to fossil fuels. If Nigeria is not careful, it's going to be left holding the last barrel of crude
Okay.
oil in the world.
Okay. Prof, let me just put this in before you go. I know it's the last I said earlier. What do you
Okay,
think will be,
last now.
yes, last, finally. What do you think will be the fate of African professionals, Nigerian professionals, for example, families, students that are seeking opportunities in the United States and don't have an idea of what to do now? Amid all these visa restrictions coming, just a few seconds.
One, I think we will see which of those new policies endure. As I said earlier, many of them are being, the key ones are being legally challenged. So let's see
Okay.
what happens.
What
But
happens?
the other thing is this: the United States is not asking people not to come into the country legally.
Yeah.
I think the key matter here is about how people come in. And if you see one of the three things that people complained about during the last election, they complained about three things: the economy, crime, immigration. Immigration meaning people coming into the country illegally. I think if you're a Nigerian and you're seeking to move to the United States legally, I don't think you should expect any problems.
Professor Ebenezer Obadare, it's been so nice chatting with you. First time on the show. Thank you. I hope this will not be your last. We'll continue to speak. In fact, when a lot of people saw your flyer that you were coming on the show, they had to message me that it's been long. You were their colleague some time ago. In fact, let me drop this here. Professor Adeola Denikinjo, I don't know, you should know him, said you were.
I know him.
Exactly.
I know him.
He said I should say hello to you and I will share your
first-class
contact.
economy.
Yes, and I'll share your contact with him. He's the president of Nigeria Economic Society. So a lot of people here are happy to see you today on the show. So let's speak again
for having me.
sometime soon, Prof.
Okay. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Prof, thank you very much. And thank you for waking up early to speak with me. Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too, sir. All right, I've been speaking with Professor Ebenezer Obadare, Douglas Dillon Senior Fellow for Africa Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations, United States. All right, so that's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. Thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to join our business clinic on Friday. So send I'm interested to our WhatsApp number, and I'll be here tomorrow, though. So it's not until Friday you see me. I'll be here same time on this station. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Thank you for watching. In case this is your first time watching us, thank you. Don't subscribe to the channel, drop your comments as well as like, and most of all, share our content.